Hello, everybody. I had the opportunity to sit down in person today with Warren Smith. Warren was a teacher, and he recorded himself having a discussion with a student about a rather contentious topic. Turned out to be J.K. Rowling's reactions to the propaganda insanity that plagues our culture in 15 different ways.
Do you still like her work despite her bigoted opinions?
So let's get specific though. Let's define bigoted opinions. What opinions are bigoted?
She has had a history of being extremely transphobic, I've heard.
Hey, you've heard. So what? Can you give me an example?
In 2019, she said, "Live your best life in peace and security, but force women out of their jobs for stating that sex is real."
So you find that bigoted? What do you find about
It was
the video, which was remarkable, I would say, for the good sense that Warren brought to it, the calm demeanor, the intelligent questioning of the student, really the professional way that he handled the discussion, which is now so rare among those who purport to be teachers, that the mere fact of its professionalism was remarkable in and of itself, enough so that it went viral.
Do you find that transphobic yourself?
I don't really have an opinion on it, but I'm just going with what a lot of other people have said.
So let's pause it. Let's not go with what other people are saying. Let's try and learn how to critically think. So let's analyze the tweet ourselves. So that statement, do you see anything problematic?
Was shared by Elon Musk among many other people. And as you might imagine, that produced an explosive effect on Warren's life.
So it happened yesterday. I was fired from my full-time teaching position.
That was followed up by a Piers Morgan interview, which I guess was the secondary explosion in the two explosions that rocked his life.
I am absolutely surprised by this completely. I never expected this at all. This came out accidentally. We have interactions like this on a daily basis. This one just happened to be captured on camera.
Which was also quite distressing, as you might expect, given his level of commitment to his teaching profession.
I have devoted 4 years of my life to this school, and yesterday it was like being a character in a video game and just being deleted.
I wanted to talk to Warren because I really liked the video that he made. I thought it was remarkable for its sanity, especially given the time, and I was very curious about everything that had happened to him in consequence of the viral explosion of what he had done as a teacher. And so we sat down for an hour and a half to talk all that through. The consequences of saying what you think when the situation is set up to reward you for maintaining your silence. Join us for that discussion. Hello, Mr. Smith. Thank you for coming in today.
It's an honor. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, I probably came across you the way most people did, and I guess that was with the video that went viral that Musk shared, eh? Lots of people who are watching and listening won't know anything about you, so why don't we start from the beginning? What was it that brought you to public attention, and tell us the story about your teaching career?
Well, public attention, it was that video that you're talking about. But the beginning, I've been thinking about this a lot because I've had time to reflect on it more.
Mm-hmm.
So after that video, it was a strange experience because suddenly you have like 1 5-minute video and suddenly you have this perceived value.
Mm-hmm.
But I was the exact same person as before that video. Now, it was not, for me, it was life-changing though.
Mm-hmm.
Suddenly, so I have some people wanting to talk to me, which was people that I have genuinely admired. Like, this is a bit kind of but Dave Rubin, just opportunities that I never expected. And so I've been reflecting on those conversations because I found myself kind of feeling like I was trying to live up to something from that video. So there's this idea of what suddenly I was labeled this kind of like this critical thinking Socratic method guy. And I wasn't intentionally doing that at all. I have no background in Socratic method or critical thinking. I was just doing what I thought was sensible in the moment.
You don't necessarily know who you are, that's the thing. And it wasn't exactly chance that made the video go viral, right? You obviously touched on a nerve, and in a manner that people admired. Tell the story of the video and talk about your work too. You were working as a high school teacher when you released that video. Tell people the story of the video and how it came to be and why it was recorded to begin with.
Sure. So after graduate school, I found myself as a public school teacher right up before COVID, the year leading into COVID, just teaching what I majored in. And my plans were always to be a college professor. And I teach some courses, but I'm not tenure track or anything. And perhaps one day but I found myself in this unlikely position, and I enjoyed it, teaching the same subject matter, video technology, what we're doing right here.
Mm-hmm. To high school kids. What was
kids.
now you had a MFA?
Yes.
And what was the specialty?
Video production.
In video production. And when did you graduate with a master's degree?
2019.
2019. And then you were looking, what kind of jobs were you looking for?
In education.
In education. And you landed a job as a high school teacher.
As a high school teacher, just by pure kind of just chance. And I really enjoyed it. COVID hits. Everything goes ape crazy. The school shuts down. They make cuts because of the teachers union. All first year hires are gone. So that kind of left a taste in my mouth about unions. Mm-hmm. One of my first experiences with unions. And so I started looking for another job, and I found a school that specialized in kids with behavioral challenges. And this is kind of what I was alluding to at the beginning. There are things that I've wanted to talk about in these kind of interviews that happen, or when someone wants to discuss this, they want to discuss the video. And I find myself, because you've spoken about when you feel your words mm-hmm. making you not what you could be or weaker. Mm-hmm. You can feel it.
Mm-hmm. I decided that I would start practicing not saying things that would make me weak. And what happened was that I had to stop saying almost everything that I was saying.
And that's how I
practiced with that, have you?
To say that you had an impact on my life, which is why this is surreal. To say you had an impact on my life would be an understatement. And we can get into that if
okay.
you'd like. That was in graduate school.
Okay.
But I was feeling that in those conversations, trying to live up to something in a way. I mean, it was, you're kind of saying that what people want to hear, not trying to sound intelligent, but something like that. Mm-hmm. And I never expected anything like this to happen, but I did tell myself if I ever, by some miracle, had the chance to speak to you, I would allow myself permission to allow my words to have that vulnerability and to go to that place that I have not allowed myself to go to, because I think there is value there. Mm-hmm. But the reason I bring that, because that is kind of, I've never spoken about the reality of the school where I was teaching.
Yeah, okay. Well, let's go down that path.
So these are kids with behavioral challenges that other schools could not handle them.
So they put them all together.
It's a last line of defense, sort of. So they're specialized. It's funded through public school system. So a student is so challenging. It could be for any reason. Some are involved with gangs, substance abuse challenges. Some are bullies. Some are the bullied. Mm-hmm. For whatever reason, that school can't. They're just not equipped. They pay, I think it's $50,000 a head, something along those lines, to send them to this school, which is governed by a board and an executive director. Mm-hmm. And here I am.
And you were hired at that school?
With COVID going mm-hmm. on.
Did you have any experience at all dealing with behaviorally challenged kids?
No.
So why'd they hire you?
I interviewed well. I'm going to strive to be as honest as I can throughout this. So I interviewed well.
Yeah.
I think they saw potential. I think they were looking for young teachers that could weather that kind of storm.
Mm-hmm. Were they mostly boys in the school?
Yes.
What proportion?
I would say 80%.
Yeah. Well, that's what you'd expect if you brought behaviorally challenged kids together, because they'd be much more likely to be boys. How old?
high school age, whether there are some middle school. It was interesting the way the building is divided to where a subset of middle school specialized with one group. But because of COVID, it was divided up into pods because they were worried about cross-contamination of COVID. So there was 10 students approximately to one site. And I was assigned to one site as the multimedia teacher, teaching the same thing I've always taught. And there was no crossover. And then there was 3 teachers assigned to one site to manage those 10 students, which ratio of teacher to student is quite high. Mm-hmm. That's what their needs necessitate.
Mm-hmm. How long did you teach at that school?
Up until losing my job, so 4 years.
4 years. Okay, so you stuck it out too.
Well, I remember when the first speech they give, the principal that hired me, I'm very fond of, and the assistant principal, they are no longer there. They were dismissed a year prior to me, but they are the ones that hired me. So when you ask why'd they hire you, he's the only person that could answer that. I remember I was in the interview. This assistant principal walks in and he's like dressed. There was really no dress code because he walks in and he's like, blow my mind in 8 seconds. And then I forget what I said. And then he just walked out and didn't say a single word. And I left thinking, I just blew that interview, but I got the job. So anyways, we're there on the first day and he's like, look, guys, if you're still teaching at this school in 4 years, something's probably wrong with you, or you have some sadomasochistic, or you just have some, I think he was alluding to that there's some reason you have that, like, this is not your typical pathway for educators. He's trying to illustrate the reality that most times they get traditional educators that realize where they are, mm-hmm. and it's too late at that point, and then they just vanish. And they're mm-hmm. like, they last a week, if that. We've had teachers come in and last a day. One day and just get in their car and leave.
What happens to them?
They're like, this is chaos. I can't survive this for a year. We were walking around with walkie-talkies so that you can respond quickly. We're trained in safety care so that you can go hands-on if needed. Mm-hmm. Fights breaking out. It's not juvie, but it's one step away from juvie. Mm-hmm. Though you also have students that are not headed to juvie, but they're the ones that get bullied. Or for whatever reason, they have an IEP plan that...
And what's that?
An individualized education plan.
Yeah.
I have dyslexia, though some students would have dyslexia to a degree where they need... It was a special education school. And it's designed so that we can accommodate everything.
Right.
So the students that are hyper-aggressive are put in one, there's going to be flaws to this logically, are put in one quadrant, one site. They were divided into sites, 1, 2, 3, 4, whatnot. So that you can't put the bullies with the bullied.
Right.
But then you have hyper-aggressive
people
bunch
together.
Of males.
Yeah.
A lot of fights.
Right,
That's
of course.
the site I was on.
In the beginning was the Word. Christ is a master at using short, mysterious stories. They change the listener who takes them seriously. My experience with the biblical text is that they're inexhaustible sources of wisdom. If I find something in them that is an obstacle, it's because there's something in me that has yet to be transformed. I just don't get it.
The person that you do not think could ever be virtuous, let me show you. This is the person who is fulfilling the law and the prophets.
But seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and all these things shall be added to you as well.
I don't believe in that promise. I'll just be honest on this point. That has not been part of my experience.
This parable I've been trying to understand forever. While we were talking and while we were sitting there, then it hit me. I saw it.
Name me one ideology that has supplanted Christianity that has done good for humanity. This Jew is very frightened of a post-Christian society.
He was the God-man, the model, the example of what we ought to become and what we can become.
It's okay. It's safe for you and all of your doubts and apprehensions to open up and to let these stories in.
He is the temple. He is the Torah. He is the covenant. He is prophecy fulfilled.
If you're doing this and it isn't also the love of wisdom, it's also an attempt at wisdom without love. In both ways, you're going radically wrong.
Power of love. It sounds so cliche when you say
60s, eh? I don't want to be on a Hallmark card, I tell you.
We've got our work cut out for us, gentlemen.
This is one peculiar time and one peculiar text, and I sure hope we're up to the task. So let's just get this timeline exactly right. So you got your master's degree in 2000, at the end of 2019?
19.
And then you had a teaching job in a relatively...
Just run-of-the-mill high school.
Right. And COVID put an end to that. And then as COVID lifted, you found a job in this school that was for behaviorally challenged kids. And it was a very mixed bag of behaviorally challenged kids, which is also a very interesting administrative decision. I mean, the idea that you would put all the kids with all the problems in the same school is a strange idea. It's not like problems constitutes a category.
Yeah.
It's not a category at all. And then, well, you alluded to this as well, it isn't the least bit evident from the evidence that putting aggressive kids together is anything but a really bad idea, right? There's immense clinical literature demonstrating exactly that. And you said you ended up with the aggressive kids. Okay, but you also pointed out that you taught there for 4 years.
So it changed. The landscape transformed.
Okay.
Those first 2 years were the most chaotic. Perhaps that had something to do with COVID. So, because I arrived during COVID, suddenly there's a kind of an outbreak at the school. I remember driving into the parking lot one morning, half the staff are coming out of the parking lot, getting into their cars, and they're telling us to leave. So I'm on site 1. For whatever reason, all the teachers were sent home on site 1 except me. Now, there was no students in the building, though, for 3 or 4 weeks this went on. And so I was teaching remotely in my classroom on my computer.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of expanded the curriculum to help. They needed me to fill in with other things. I remember that distinctly. And so then we get through that. That might have happened. It was like every few months there was an outbreak on this site and they're gone. And so, and you can't walk through these doors for contamination, and COVID ends. And over the course of the next 2 years, it changed, because originally multimedia, I was able to grow the program to where I was able to work with the entire building. It was no longer just limited to one site, which was remarkable, because in upstairs, they have students with severe physical challenges, Down syndrome challenges such as that. And that requires a completely different specialty.
No doubt.
And a different type of staff and professionalism even, because you can't afford a mistake. It's life or death. And I began to work with those students as well. And you're always going to have inner politics, office place politics and whatnot. And certain cliques form. And I mentioned the principal and assistant principal both just got fired in the middle of the day, same day. And they put out a reason, and they're like, oh, they keep it vague. And it was clearly, there was kind of in the first year, the school tried to unionize. There was a movement to unionize. And that principal that hired me was very against it. And I voted against it because my previous experience with unions, I was starting to wake up to the reality of the drawbacks. And I understand the motivation behind unions, so my point is the interplays politics, and it took them out. But I was able to, this new principal arose, who was a very nice guy. There was originally 2 assistant principals, and one was the guy who, in my mind, I'm almost positive, kind of led that formation of what caused them to leave. And he ascended in power, became the only assistant principal, and his good buddy, who was 30 years old at the time, became the principal, which is pretty young to be a principal. And he was a very nice guy, though. And for whatever reason, I got moved across the street into a separate building, though, which I actually liked because it gave me more room to grow. And so the students when the teachers, I had all the students would rotate. The teachers would bring them across the street. I had this great lab, multimedia lab with a 3D printer. We were investing in new equipment, camera technology, Photoshop. I had like 11 iMacs running Premiere Pro and Photoshop. And
how are the kids responding to this? Well, you're describing a program. It sounds to me like you're describing a program that was successful and that grew. Is that the case? And the kids, were they responding well to what you were teaching?
I think that it was really interesting to notice the difference. The students downstairs, the behavioral versus physical challenges.
Yeah.
The students upstairs were the ones that resonated the most with Photoshop, video editing. There was an enthusiasm. So a student with autism, something about some of these skills, they just love, you get them going on video editing.
Mm-hmm. It's very detail oriented.
And so I just loved working with those students, and I didn't get to do that until my last 2 years. But it was the first 2 years with those other students, I still think I was making progress with them. Like bringing in digital, as a teacher, you're not supposed to have favorites, but the student that I was probably the most fond of, who ended up getting kicked out over something, that he was just a brilliant illustrator. He could draw, like, just incredible, and came from nothing. And most of these kids, it was I think the core issue was just there was no parents. The parents,
yeah.
I mean, we'd have open house and no one would show up.
Right. So they were on their own.
Yeah. And that student in particular, I found something that resonated with him. We invested in like a critter drawing tablet, and he accelerated with that. But the problem came in the form I noticed when they would say, he's drawing illustrations of samurais in combat. What good is that going to do him? We want him to do projects that are relevant to the school, but then they would give me no criteria or set plans. There was no curriculum in place. I developed it all myself, which there's pros and cons to that. There's a lot of freedom to that, but the challenge is that it allows them to come in at their convenience if they...
And who was they?
Leadership, which I never had an issue with. I never had an issue until I published that video.
Okay, so let's talk about that. Tell everybody about what the video was. We'll clip it into this so that people can see it, obviously. But describe why was it that you were posting videos, and how did this particular one come about?
So these guys want to talk about J.K. Rowling? Is that so? What's going on with that? What do you want to know?
She's had a pretty controversial past. I just want to know, like, what are your thoughts on it? And, like, do you still like her work despite her bigoted opinions?
So let's get specific, though. Let's define bigoted opinions.
She has had a history of being extremely transphobic, I've heard.
You've heard. So what? Can you give me an example?
So one of these tweets that she came out with in 2019, she said, "Dress however you please, call yourself whatever you like, sleep with any consenting adult who will have you, live your best life in peace and security, but force women out of their jobs for stating that sex is real."
So you find that bigoted?
I don't really have an opinion on it, but I'm just going with what a lot of other people have said.
So let's pause there. Let's not go with what other people are saying. Let's try and learn how to critically think. So let's analyze the tweet ourselves. So that statement, do you see anything problematic?
Force women out of their jobs for stating that sex is real.
So when I hear that, I'm interpreting that as meaning if a woman says that, saying that there's a difference between men and female and then being attacked as transphobic, I think that's what she's saying by attacking someone for stating that sex is real.
That is exactly what she's saying.
Is that transphobic to you?
So, to me, no.
So is there anything you disagree with in that tweet?
In that tweet, I can't really see anything that I myself disagree with.
So now that we're looking at it like, oh, there's not much difference between me or her, do you think it's fair that that she's being attacked by a large group of people and people are calling her, like you said at the beginning of this conversation, you said, given the fact that J.K. Rowling is transphobic, how do you feel about Harry Potter? Now, retroactively looking at that statement, do you think that was the best way to phrase?
No, I feel like an idiot now.
It's okay though, but this is why we do this, to learn how to think.
I discovered 2017 a video of a professor, low quality video in this classroom that looked like mine. You're standing in front of the classroom talking about archetypes of Harry Potter. It was you. And I was like, that's cool. And this is 2017. That was the first video I saw of you. And I went down the rabbit hole, Kathleen Devon and all that, the classics. But that, and I said to I'm going to try this because I was teaching students about filmmaking and movies. And I was teaching a journalism class, and I was like, this ties in directly. And I loved this style. I was like, teaching is a performance. There's a performance art element to this because you have to be engaging to be able to stand in front of a classroom and get them engaged. There's an artistic element to that I'm not sure how to articulate that. It might not be right.
No, you did. It's a performance.
But that's what I saw in your video. So I went in, it was probably a few weeks later, and we have all the cameras. And I was teaching a student how to use, I said, okay, now you know how to use the camera. Let's try and record this lecture. I saw this thing on YouTube.
Yeah.
And I essentially ran through Archetypes and Harry Potter, and they loved it. And that video is on YouTube. People can watch it. No one watched it at the time, but it's up there, and that's years ago, maybe 5 years ago. That's how it started. So I started, and I was like, this is I agree with you that YouTube is a Gutenberg revolution that we cannot comprehend what it means. It is massive potential, and it's exciting. So I fell in love with that aspect of it, because there's teaching portfolios. Well, what better thing to have in a teaching portfolio
than your teaching,
than a recording of you actually teaching? Because they ask you to have artifacts, provide artifacts of your teaching. Here's a video of me teaching.
Right.
Beat that. It's like, so that was the thinking. And and also in multimedia, we would do reviews of movies like The Queen's Gambit. And it was just a way to get students to practice articulating themselves. Public speaking, when you don't have a room full of people for them to practice in front of, a camera is not a bad substitute because it allows them to watch it back, hear their voice, which at first no one likes. It causes you to cringe. It's a very interesting response.
Right.
But you can learn so much from watching and those repetitions and doing it again and again. And they loved it. Some of the students just really loved it. So to bring us to that video, they asked me to do a newscast. They're like, we want to try a new idea. Can you do a newscast for the school once a week, which is what I was doing in that public school. But that was a legit newscast that would go out live to every classroom once a week on Friday. They had all the technology to do it. And they would upload everything to social media. That's why I have a Twitter. That was the only reason I even had a Twitter account at the time.
That was the original school.
The original school, public. I can even say that it was Neshoba Regional High School in Massachusetts. So if you go to my Twitter feed, the very only first tweets, they're all just Neshoba student broadcast and the head of my department would ask me to just share them. I thought that was just normal. And there was students loved it. And
so how much recording of your teaching were you doing in your classes
not much.
In the second school?
Not too much. I mean, it was more projects like the Queen's Gambit review. I had a colleague, the music teacher, had a passion for camera technology as well. And he was my closest collaborator because we were vocational teachers, meaning we worked with the whole building. We were the only ones that everyone else worked with just their sites. There was like a culinary teacher, landscaping, and they were always experimenting with the vocations, but music and multimedia always remained consistent.
How big a school?
Only downstairs, 50 students. Upstairs, about 50 students.
Okay. And how many teachers?
Well, the ratio...
You said it was 3-to-1 about,
That's what they strive for, but they're constantly battling understaffing because teachers just vanish often.
Had you done a lot of videos in the build-up to the video that got so much attention?
I had been posting little things, just like what I was mentioning, like reviews and things, but no one was watching them and no one cared. It wasn't, and working with the music teacher, we would do like the mathematics of the Fibonacci sequence in music, things which are still up there. So if you're curious to dig into that, you can, if anyone's watching this, but to answer your question about how this video came about, so they asked me to do a news broadcast. We're not equipped to do that, but we tried anyways. And they're like, we want this kid to be the person on camera and just go through, this is what happened in the school this week. So we go in the room, we go to set it up, and he's getting stage fright, camera shy. And I think it's very important in teaching to lead by example. So let's just do a warm up. I'll sit on camera. You operate it. Let's just have a conversation. Treat it like a podcast real quick. Let's do like a 5-minute warm up. Just ask me something that that would interest you. Okay. He hits record. All right. So how have your views on J.K. Rowling changed given her bigoted opinions? Or how have your views on Harry Potter changed given J.K. Rowling's bigoted opinions? Well, first we need to address that, and then just walk through it. And I thought, that's interesting, and maybe I'll try something new with this YouTube thing. And I just uploaded it. I was like, that's interesting enough to post. I didn't think anyone would watch it.
Walk us through your response. What did you know about, you mentioned watching the Harry Potter, an analysis of Harry Potter I had done. And
let's walk through it. So, well, first we need to address, is she bigoted? That's the glaring presupposition.
Right.
So what do you
So that constitutes a loaded question. Right.
So what are you basing that upon? Well, I've heard that she's the tweets. Okay. Do you have any, I can show you the tweets if you want. Sure. Let's take a look. Dig some tweets out. We read the tweets. Okay. So do you find that, what about that is transphobic? And I don't remember the exact tweet. We clarify it. And then he goes, oh, but she did apologize as well for this other thing. There's this other piece of evidence. Okay, let's take a look. Same process. Then so I point out, okay, so there's really not much difference between you and her. You understand that she's stating that it's important to her experience as a woman. She has no issue with someone identifying how they want to identify, but that's not going to change. That shouldn't impact her experience and the reality that she's a woman and what that means in reality. No, I agree with that. Okay. So now looking back at the beginning of this conversation, that claim you made when you call her bigoted, do you think that was a fair thing to say? No. Now I feel stupid.
Mm-hmm.
That's okay. That's why we do this. And often I would have interesting conversations when they arose, going back to the idea of, and there was some blowback about that, of why are you having conversations? Your job is to teach students how to set up cameras and shoot videos and do photo editing and 3D printing and using this technology. But as we just pointed out, there's if the goal is to use this technology with students in the way that is going to most benefit them, well, that should be.
The use of the technology isn't independent of the content, especially if you're doing video recording.
And there's so much utility in teaching students how to think, how to articulate themselves, and often they have questions about things in the world. I've had students ask me, like, what's a Republican versus a Democrat? And you're like, you're a senior in high school. Let's talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
And then we can kill two birds with one stone. And then we'll have stuff to edit, and it's things that interest you. So if we need footage to edit, might as well make it interesting. And if we can talk about something that actually matters in the world and you can learn something from it, well, why not? So you
can't learn to edit footage without having something interesting that you're interested in, because there's nothing to edit.
And you could just film music videos and things, but I see more utility. And if a student wants to discuss something like that, I see, that was my reasoning behind it.
Well, that's especially relevant with regards to editing, because you want to clip and cut so that you get to the gist of the matter. And that means there has to be something there to focus on. So
if you're watching, if a student they shoot a music video and they're watching themselves playback dancing and they're editing that, okay, but when you watch yourself speaking, debating, or just, you're learning those oratory skills, you're getting over public speaking fright. There's more utility, I believe, than simply there's nothing wrong if a student wants to do like something like a music video.
Well, you could do something creative too, but even then it's got to have a point.
But why not encapsulate as much as possible? If our objective is to use what we have to help students as best we can.
Going online without ExpressVPN is like putting all your passwords and credit card numbers on a huge billboard for the whole world to see. Every time you connect to an encrypted network in cafes, hotels, airports, your online data is completely exposed. And here's the scary part. With just some basic hardware, anyone can gain access to your passwords, bank logins, and credit card details. Think about that. Your valuable personal data, worth up to $1,000 on the dark web, could be stolen by practically anyone with the right tools. That's where ExpressVPN comes in. It creates a secure, encrypted tunnel between your device and the internet, making it virtually impossible for hackers to access your data. We're talking about encryption so powerful, it would take a hacker with a supercomputer over 1 billion years to break through. I use ExpressVPN every time I'm working from coffee shops or airports. And let me tell you, the peace of mind is invaluable. Just one click on the app, and I know my data is protected. It works on all of my devices, phone, laptop, tablet, everything I need to stay secure on the go. There's a reason ExpressVPN is rated #1 by top tech reviewers like CNET and The Verge. It's simply the most reliable way to protect yourself online. Right now, you can take advantage of ExpressVPN's Black Friday Cyber Monday offer to get the absolute best VPN deal you'll find all year. Use the link expressvpn.com/Jordan to get 4 extra months with the 12-month plan or 6 extra months with the 24-month plan totally free. That's expressvpn.com/Jordan to get an extra 4 or even 6 months of ExpressVPN for free.
Well, obviously also the technique that you were using, so to speak, insofar as it's a technique, is asking pertinent questions. There isn't any difference between that and teaching people how to think, because if you're thinking, you're asking yourself pertinent questions, and you're certainly not going to learn to do that without an example. The whole point of being a teacher is to, or at least one of the main points of being a teacher is to teach people how to ask themselves pertinent questions and to model that. So why do you think, so it's interesting that it was the conversation about J.K. Rowling that went viral. I mean, she certainly caused an endless stream of political upset in the UK, turned into quite a stunning advocate for free speech. And she has, in fact, focused on this trans issue, which is likely the most bizarre issue that's ever dominated the political space, as far as I can tell. And I guess one of the things that your video demonstrated was the pertinence of that issue to students who have questionable reasons for being concerned about it to begin with. Like, why do you think that this particular student was possessed by the belief that was a thing to begin with? Because that's also a bastardization of words in the most manipulative possible way, to take a clinical terminology, phobia, and then to append it to objection to anything that the person who's objecting, or what would you say? I can object to something. If someone's irritated about that, they're going to medicalize my objection and describe it as a pathology. That's what happens when you use the term phobia. It's unbelievably manipulative. And I would say the radical leftists are stunningly good at that manipulation of language. But now you have a student who is objecting to J.K. Rowling on the basis of transphobia, and you're asking questions about it. Now, is that part of what also got you in it's obviously one of the things that made this go viral, but was it also one of the things that got you in trouble?
Well, there's no way for me to know exactly. I think that there's as you know, most things in life are far more complex than a singular explanation. I think that a lot of it was the virality itself. Given that we're a school where there are some loose practices, there's been things like the 2 principals just being removed. There was attacks of scandal like a few years prior to my arrival. Because we have the way grades are assigned, often it's the site's sitting there. It's like, okay, what's Jimmy going to get in your class? Give him like a 73. And there's no record, there's no reasoning to it. And that's literally how it occurs. Why did they offer me $9,000 to shut up, or why to sign this? And Like, why do you need an NDA?
So there was worry about potential public attention. Well, you can understand. I mean, the school that you're operating in is insanely complex. There's absolutely no way to run a school like that that isn't full of trouble, obviously, because the whole school's built on trouble. And so I can imagine that the people who are running the school would be nervous about that, because I can't possibly see that there's any way that you could do it right. Right? I mean,
that's a good point.
Well, you mentioned that teachers come for one day and they leave, or they come for a week. It's just, it's designed, it's a system designed to collate chaos and to try to produce some sort of order, but it seems to me to be entirely impossible. Pretty much no matter what you do, you're going to do something wrong.
That's a fair
how
point.
the hell could you possibly avoid it?
That's a
Every
good point.
single one of those kids is a pitfall.
Yeah.
And I don't mean that that's not a criticism. It's just well, the system's designed so that every single kid that comes there is trouble on stilts. And then you're also going to have the case that many of the teachers who are going to apply are going to be people who are applying to that school because it's a last ditch possibility. And so
I often, you often, I wondered that sometimes. I'm like, why am I here? I mean, the health insurance is awful. It's like, pays not. Why choose? That's why people leave. But there's a lot of good people there that aren't, it's not like this is the bottom of the barrel teachers that can't, there are some of those. It's like, dude, what are you doing?
Right. There'd be some of those. Yes.
But there are also many good people that are doing it because there's something fulfilling about it that I miss, to be honest. I miss it.
Well, I think what drew my attention to your video, and also what made me want to talk to you, is because I think the reason that video went viral and drew the attention of the people whose attention it did draw was because you were obviously very sane and careful in an insane situation discussing something utterly preposterous. And it was all of that contrast that made it fascinating. I mean, the fact that issue even arose in a school is ridiculous under anything approximating normal times. And yet you handled it carefully and thoughtfully, and you did it in a way that was obviously of educational benefit to the students. And that none of that should be surprising, actually, like the manner in which you addressed it. But it's also the fact that sane response to that question is surprising in the education system that made it go viral. And so, because we're so accustomed to seeing crazily woke, ideologically possessed, ranting narcissists acting as teachers, ideologically addling children when they ask questions that they should have no concern about whatsoever. Like, it just strikes me as utterly preposterous that a 15-year-old kid would think that it was necessary for him to accuse J.K. Rowling of transphobia.
17.
17. Okay, so that's just an indication of the state of the school system in general. And
I don't think he was even accusing her. I think he was just repeating what he thought was reality.
Of course. You know? Of course, exactly. Well, you said that as you investigated with, some relatively elementary but also eminently sane questions, that revealed itself very quickly. He was just spouting the cliches of the moment, right? The radical cliches of the moment. And was he doing that because he thought he should? Like, what was your impression of the reasons for his questions?
He genuinely believed that was what the truth was. He thought that was reality. He articulates that. I've heard many classmates state this, so it must be true. In the same way, you hear this often with people. I just made a critique video with Barry Weiss doing this. I was a little hard on her on Joe Rogan when she's saying it's the same pattern. She's applying this to Tulsi Gabbard, and he presses her on it slightly, and it dissolves. And we all are capable of doing. We all do this in our lives. I'm not above it, but
no one's above it. No one's above it. We radically seek. We seek to establish consensus rapidly and radically. And if there's no challenge to the consensus, that's good because it means that we're unified, but it also means that we can build a false consensus. And that happens continually. And I mean, that's one of the dangers of so-called populism, is that it's a false consensus, right? It's a consensus of the moment. It's got no staying power. It can't iterate across time. Now, the antidote to populist consensus is something like alignment with eternal tradition, because it stops the proclivity for rapid consensus from pathologizing. I mean, it's actually a good thing, all things considered, because if human beings couldn't reach agreement on most things rapidly, all we would ever do is fight. But the danger, of course, is a false consensus. And that's obviously what you were questioning. And you did it in an extremely thoughtful manner. Okay, so you recorded that, your students edited it? How did it end up edited? And
there was one edit when he takes out his phone because he's like looking for the tweet for maybe a minute, and so I cut that out and uploaded it to my YouTube channel that I had been uploading everything in the past.
Right. So this was just standard practice on YouTube. You have to be very careful about what you upload to YouTube, as I found out in 2016. Right. Because it's an unbelievably powerful technology and you never know what's going to happen. So as you also found out. And so, okay, so you uploaded this and I presume you thought nothing of it. Okay, what happened? Lay out the story.
It started getting a few views and then it got 13,000 views. The music teacher I was telling you about, who had been on this journey with me in a way, we were exploring this technology, even making videos where there was no students on our free time. Like the Fibonacci sequence in music was just the two of us. He texts me, he says, it's got 13,000 views. Oh, for me, that's whoa.
And over what period of time?
Maybe, this is probably like a week, 2 weeks.
Okay, right.
That afternoon, I get a text from my brother and he says, Elon Musk tweeted a video of you.
Oh, yeah.
And I thought,
there's the kiss of death.
Ha ha ha. Right. And I hadn't opened my Twitter account since that Neshoba school, so I couldn't log in. I didn't have my password and figured it out. And I was like, whoa. Okay. That was, then 2 days later, then I go to school the next day. Don't say a word. I'm like, I'm just going to not say anything. Maybe no one saw it. I don't really comprehend what's going on with there. When you're in it, it doesn't. The principal calls me in his office. He's like, yeah, not talking about it is not going to work. Like, everybody's seen the video. He was on the fence of how to feel about it. Because he was obviously worried, as anyone would be, about his responsibilities in getting in trouble with the higher ups. Is this against the policy we have? We have releases. I have the releases where there's no student on camera. We have an audio release. You'd been doing this anyway. I've been doing this for a while. But this is different. And I think it's totally understandable to be a little shocked. We're in new territory here.
Yeah, right.
Piers Morgan's team reaches out. Would you like to come on Piers Morgan tomorrow? Well, I'm at a crossroads. It's like, do I run with this as far as, there's two options. Let it pass over, go back to my life, or I recognize.
Maybe go back to your life.
Or I recognize that this is a once in a lifetime, potentially. I don't know what it means, where it could go. But it could be an opportunity. There's only one way to find out, and that's to run with it. Well, if I say, I know this much from my life and regret, if I say no to this, going on Piers Morgan, which could go badly, I might regret this, but I know I will regret it forever.
How did you know that? Why did you conclude that?
Because I have regretted things in my life before. I know that regret, it's worse to try something and to fail in the pursuit of that. I would rather try and run with this ball as far as I can, take it as far as I can till I get tackled, than to refuse to pick it up.
The world moves fast these days. Markets rise and fall. Policies change, and uncertainty seems to be the only constant. But there's something that's held its value for thousands of years. Physical gold. Right now, Birch Gold is offering something extraordinary. When you open a tax-sheltered IRA in physical gold, they'll send you a free 1-ounce American Silver Eagle for every $5,000 purchased. And here's the brilliant part. You don't need to spend a dime out of pocket. Simply convert your existing IRA or 401k. Now, you might be thinking the markets are doing fine. Why bother? Consider this. We're facing a national debt of $36 trillion. That's not a problem that disappears overnight, no matter who's in charge. In fact, we can barely cover the interest payments, let alone tackle the principal. This isn't about doom and gloom. It's about being prepared, about taking responsibility for your financial future. It's about making intelligent choices while opportunities present themselves. Take control of your retirement strategy today. Text Jordan to 989898 before December 18th to receive your free information kit on gold and to claim your eligibility for free silver on qualifying purchases. That's Jordan to 989898. And don't wait. This offer expires December 18th.
Yeah, well, you know, there is clinical evidence for that. If you ask people, older people, to look back on their life and to list their regrets, it's much more common for them to have serious regrets about chances they didn't take than failures that they experienced. The thing about failure is a weird thing, you know, because my experience in life has been that nothing I ever actually did failed. It didn't necessarily produce the result that I intended when I intended it. But if it was a genuine effort and I followed through on it, there was some benefit that emerged in consequence of that justified the effort. And sometimes that was quite a long time later. And I think that kind of stands to reason in a sense too, because the alternative explanation would be that you could try to do something difficult well and see it through, and there'd be zero impact of that. Well, that makes no sense. You're going to learn something. Maybe what you learn is how you could have done it better or how you could do it better, but you're going to learn something. Okay, so you what kind of regrets had you had in the past? If you don't mind, maybe you can share some of those, maybe not, but what came to mind?
My original plan was movies. All I wanted to do growing up was make movies. There was nothing more exciting than seeing people be able to alter time and space. It's like they were using the fabric of reality to create worlds which are real when you're watching it. Mm-hmm. You've explored this idea, and it was like, what else? The logical course of action. What else would I possibly want to do than that? There was nothing more exciting. And I was undergrad, one of the top film schools in the country, UNC School of the Arts, and I excelled, and I was nailing these opportunities, and I was like, it kind of got to my head. I found like short film after short film. Suddenly, it's in a pattern that had not. Going to LA, like writing and producing a feature film right out of the gate, using that momentum with this team of like the students that have come together and become this like pirate band almost that have moved from, and we raised $25,000 to make this feature film. And as we're going to camp out and everyone's going to work for free and film it on the farm where I grew up so we can get all the locations for free. And it would cost at least like $500,000 in production value if you were to do a one-on-one comparison because everyone was working for free.
Yeah.
And it I feel like I blew it a lot. I feel like I blew a lot of opportunity. Mm-hmm. And I'm trying to think of any specifics, but in general, I did come to the realization that LA is not where I want to live. Hollywood is not a game in which I want to participate in for the long term. So I knew I wanted to get out of that. I didn't know what I would do. I went freelance videography and eventually graduate school. So it took me to graduate school and I left LA. But those students, the colleagues, the friends, making a movie is challenging. There's a lot of it presses relationships. And it's a deeper idea of why that is. Because often I think there's some people are subconsciously just want it to be over. Because when you're making a movie, it takes like a year. And then you have the editor and he's editing for, that's the part that takes a year. The production itself, a month or two or whatnot. But then it's just like, this has to be over, and there's so much pressure. And then that causes people to kind of dissolve under the pressure. And it's like, this is a once in a lifetime opportunity. We're never going to have all these people come together and work for free.
Okay, so you saw the same thing beckoning there with the Piers Morgan opportunity, obviously, and it is the case. I mean, and this is the case in life, is that not now and then, many impossible things come together and a door opens. And if you don't walk through it, then the probability that those impossible things will come together again is zero. And so, okay, so you decided to go on Piers Morgan. So what happened?
It was just me for a 15-minute interview.
Okay.
At the end of a segment.
Yeah.
So I'm in Massachusetts in this little town in the woods. I didn't know what to expect. I was like, is a crew coming? Like, what's going on? A guy in a van pulls up.
Oh, yeah. You had to talk directly to the camera, did you?
He's like, Harold, I'm going to mic you up. I don't know what's going on. No instructions. He's like, I jump in the back of a van right after school. So I'm at school talking to the music teacher. I'm like, dude, they want me to go on Piers Morgan. Like, do you think I'll get in trouble if I do this? And he's like, you got to do it. And I was like, I got to do it.
Right.
And I said the same thing I said to you. And he said, just don't, it's better to ask for forgiveness than for permission. That's because I knew that if I were to ask for permission and they were to say no, I'd be in a predicament now.
Right.
So I'm not going to turn that down because I know what that feeling would be. But
well, it's also not the least bit obvious that you're required to ask for permission. Besides that, this is something that everybody who's watching and listening should understand. The answer to, if you go to an authority, especially a bureaucratic authority, and you ask for permission, why wouldn't they say no? All there is in it for them is risk and perhaps jealousy and fear. So of course they're going to say no. Why wouldn't they say no? And so then you think, well, how do you deal with that? And the answer is, well, you're a free agent. What's the indication that you're required to ask for permission? In fact, if it's not illegal, or if you're not violating your, an explicit, and really, I mean explicit contract, it's like, don't ask. It's hard enough to convince yourself that you should do it, much less convince someone else who's also not going to benefit from it in the least. The other thing to understand too is that entrepreneurial motivation is relatively rare. It's only about 1 person in 50 who wants to start their own business. I really learned this when I started selling to corporations and dealing with middle management people. The fundamental motivation of 95% of people in middle management is never to do anything that makes them get noticed for any reason, good or bad. They want to do their job. They want to do it in complete and utter invisibility. And if an entrepreneurial opportunity comes along, they say, that's risky, no. And you might say, yeah, well, there's an immense potential payoff. Rather low probability, immense potential payoff. That's the entrepreneurial game. And their attitude is, I don't want to be the marked zebra that the lions cut out of the herd. You know that story?
Yeah.
You know the zebra story. I'll just tell it for people who might not have heard it. So zebras in principle are camouflage, but it's kind of a weird idea because they live on the veldt and they're black and white striped and you can seriously see a zebra. So the question is, what's the camouflage? And the answer seems to be that it's against the herd camouflage because there's no single zebras, there's herds of zebras. And so when the zebras are milling about together in a herd, because the black and white stripes are edges, if you look away and then you look again, you can't tell what zebra you were looking at. Now, the reason that's relevant is because lions can't organize themselves to hunt a zebra unless they can identify one. Okay, so you don't want to be an identifiable zebra. So biologists discovered this because they were studying zebras and trying to figure out how to watch a given zebra so they could figure out what it was up to, but they'd lose track. So they would either clip their ears with a plastic clip or put a dab of paint on their haunches. And as soon as they did that, the lions killed them. The lions could mark out the zebra and organize their hunt, and then that was a dead zebra. And, you know, you hear that in the natural world that lions often cull the herd and they take the weak and the unfit. It's like, no, they take the identifiable zebra. And the instinct of many, many people is do not be the identifiable prey animal. Right. And so if you're going to ask for permission, even permission from yourself in an odd way, the default answer is clearly no. And so, and obviously so. And so you're going to have to step outside the herd. Now, the question with human beings is there advantages in stepping outside the herd? And the advantage is, well, you get noticed. And that's not so good if there are predators around, but it's also the pathway to extreme success, which has massive potential payoffs. Now, I'm not saying that everybody should pursue that or that everybody should want it, but that's the landscape of risk. So you decided you'd already learned enough in your life to know that you don't casually throw away spectacular opportunities. Yeah, right.
The pain of regret is a unique form of pain.
Yes. Yeah, well, it's a kind of self-betrayal, right? Because you had the chance. You had the opportunity.
Yes, that's what
the door
it was.
opened.
That's what I was trying to put my finger on earlier. And I had no one to blame but myself on how like
that's seriously
turned
annoying.
Out. And that's what eats you.
Yeah, right. Definitely. Definitely. Well, it's bad enough when someone else gets in your way. But when you get in your way, it's like, well, how do you...
It's far worse.
Definitely. You know, it's also useful to know, too, that I think this is extremely useful, is that you have to deeply understand that no risk is, first of all, not desirable. You actually don't want a risk for your life. You want the risks you voluntarily take. And maybe you want high stakes risks you voluntarily take. But even more fundamentally, there is no risk pathway. You're screwed no matter what you do. And that's terrible, but it's also freeing. And so once you know that there's no safety, well, then you can take the most interesting risk. And why not? And then maybe you don't need safety. Okay, so you decided to go on Piers Morgan.
That ties directly into what happened on Piers Morgan.
Okay.
So 15 minutes, and he asked the usual questions you would expect around.
How was he with you?
He was really nice. He was very charismatic, likable, kind, and very...
Well, he's a funny guy.
He
is. He's kind of like Simon Cowell. He's in a way. You know, you can see in America's Got... I mean, they both worked on America's Got Talent and Britain's Got Talent. You can see if Cowell likes somebody, he's really on their side. And if he doesn't like them, he's really not on their side. And Morgan is like that. And he's also the sort of guy who... He'll give you the benefit of the doubt, but if you start playing games, then you're in serious trouble. So he obviously started by giving you the benefit of the doubt. He was probably, you know, reasonably pleased with the video that he had seen and thought, you know, that he would be inviting to begin with. So that worked out well. Okay, so...
And he asked the question, the last question was interesting. It's the one that stands out in my mind. And he goes, in all your hair, because he watched the video, here was producers. Someone went to the YouTube channel in the research notes, all right, give me something to... They found me talking about archetypes in Harry Potter. That I got from you.
Oh, yes, I see.
And he goes, and he thought I was some Harry Potter scholar or something. He goes, so given all your Harry Potter studies, what would the best piece of life advice be? And from all your Harry Potter studies, and I said, voluntarily enter the unknown. Which is what you were just talking about. Like, it might be, you know, the unknown beneath the surface of Hogwarts. It might be facing the serpent that could turn you to stone when you see it, like fear. But you must do so voluntarily in order to save Ginny. And it's the voluntary aspect of that is, which is just classic. Everyone echoes that. They're like, okay.
Yeah, well, it's a very good thing to know.
But it's true.
Yeah, well, it's also
true.
It's also surprising because it belies the merely objective sense of the real. A situation is the same no matter how you encounter it. That's an objectivist perspective. A situation is radically different depending on how you encounter it. Kicking and screaming is very different than voluntarily. even if the stressor is the same. And there doesn't seem to be any particular limit to that, which is why, of course, all the heroic quest archetypal narratives are voluntary confrontation with truly terrible things. Otherwise, the quest has no real deep significance. Okay, so the Piers Morgan interview, that went well. That was a success.
Yeah.
And what was the consequence of that?
The next day, I go back into school. They call me back into the principal's office, and they say, dude, you went on Piers Morgan? Like, can you at least check in with us before you do Piers Morgan? Those are the exact words that was presented.
Right.
Can you at least check with us?
Yeah, but you know that.
But what you just articulated was masterful, and that's the best logical read that you could provide on that situation, I think.
When we think about wildly successful businesses, we often focus on their great products, cool branding, and brilliant marketing. But there's an unsung hero in their success stories, the business behind the business that makes selling simple. For millions of entrepreneurs, that business is Shopify. Shopify is home to the #1 checkout on the planet. And here's the not-so-secret secret. With Shop Pay, they boost conversions up to 50%. That means fewer abandoned carts and more completed sales. Our marketing team uses Shopify every day to sell our merchandise, and we love how easy it is to add more items, ship products, and track conversions. In today's market, growth-minded businesses need a commerce solution that's just as flexible and dynamic as they are. Whether your customers are browsing your website, scrolling through social media, or wandering into your store, Shopify ensures you're ready to sell. Ready to elevate your business? Upgrade your business today and get the same checkout Daily Wire uses. Sign up for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/JBP, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/JBP today to upgrade your selling. That's shopify.com/JBP.
All bureaucratic entities will always say no to anything that's quest related.
There's
obviously
no benefit to them.
There's only risk. Right? There's only downside. Of course, this is partly why I think research has been almost completely stifled in universities. You cannot do risk-free research. Period. It's not possible. You can't just do the next safe thing. It's too obvious, first of all, and there's no excitement in the discovery. It has to be a risk, and the risk has to be real. And, we don't want to be too cynical about this either. It's not obviously the role of bureaucracies to take risks, right? It's the role of bureaucracies to set policies and strategies and to abide by the rules and move forward. Well, you see that in Harry Potter too, because there's a weird dynamic constantly in the Harry Potter stories that Rowling she was great at this because Harry's band, they're academically oriented and they're upward striving, but they're always rule breakers, right? And the grand wizard at the top of the ladder, he put all the rules that govern the educational institution in place and knows what they are, but is perfectly happy that Harry and his, band of ethical miscreants break rules.
Yeah, and he knows about it almost. They insinuate that he knows what they're doing the entire time.
Exactly, lets it go anyways. Yeah, well, that's that constant paradox. It's really the paradox of something like liberal versus conservative. The conservatives, fundamentally, I hate to call the conservatives the bureaucrats because in our weird political world, things have all got flipped around. But generally speaking, the conservative types are much more rule-oriented and much less entrepreneurial. And so, but there's a dance between those two that's absolutely necessary. And there's no getting rid of the conflict because most of the time you should follow the rules. But some of the time you definitely shouldn't. And wisdom is the ability to, and daring, that's the ability to tell the difference. Well, so you went on Piers Morgan. And so I don't blame your administrator for
Neither do I.
objecting. Although, what you would have hoped for is something like a little elbow saying, you shouldn't have done that, but good work. There was. Oh, good.
There was that. Well, the assistant principal who ascended and led that whole coup and there was something different about his response, but the principal, the 30-year-old principal, who was always very helpful to me and helping me to get, Warren, you should get your license in phonetics, and so you can have this new special ed license my first year. He was kind of a guiding hand before he suddenly had this power. And there was that at the end, and he was like, I would have done the same thing.
Oh yeah, good.
He literally said,
good. Good.
So
that's the nod and the wink. Yeah. Yeah, every institution that's going to function needs that, right? Because you need the people who impose the rules and the structure, but they need to always be able to say, well, yeah, that there is a reason for not following the procedure in that particular case.
And he said, I need to run this up the flagpole. I'm going to need to call. This is just getting, I don't know how to respond to this. Piers Morgan, I don't know. This isn't in the playbook. This isn't.
Yeah, right. Right.
So they arranged for a meeting with the executive director and her team of lawyers. Remember, there's a board that runs this school. She answers to them, I guess. And she's now president. She used to kind of have her office over near mine, but I hadn't seen her at all that past year. She just said, and so she, there was a meeting with her. Yeah, I went into a room with that principal, the one who, and it was a Zoom call. I think, no, it was just audio. And her lawyers were sitting next to her and they just said, well, technically you didn't break any rules. So congratulations. Good luck to you. I hope you don't make a mistake.
Right,
I hate to lose you. And I thought, fair enough. I'll take responsibility for anything I say and do. And me and that music teacher were like, home free, but it felt like that should be the response.
Yeah, well, that's a pretty good response. I mean, it's not surprising that they looked into it.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the things too that's worth thinking about too is that when you're called to account for yourself, when you break a rule, for example, and you upset the normal course of the routine, it's not such a bad idea to present the people who are now cast into doubt and confusion with a plan. So, for example, I had the same experience as you did, essentially, when I put up the first videos that brought me to public attention surrounding Bill C-16. And it was really the same sort of experiment that you ran. I'd put up a lot of my lectures on YouTube, and they'd got a moderate amount of attention and a reasonable amount for the time, because I started putting them, I think, in 2013 on YouTube, which was very early in YouTube development. But they hadn't attracted anything like viral attention. And then this idiot virtue signaling bill was put into law by our idiot virtue signaling prime minister. And I made 3 videos objecting to that and some university policies. That was purely experimental because I was still playing with the technology and wondering what use it was and seeing if I could lay out a structured argument as well. I edited it quite a bit, actually, that one.
Interesting.
And that went viral. And then I was called into the principal's office, so to speak, at the university, which kind of surprised me to begin with, but not exactly, because they didn't know what to do with this. And unsurprisingly, I mean, whether the dean, for example, had any right to say anything whatsoever with what I was doing with YouTube in my home, in my free time, is a completely different issue. But I suggested to them that the University of Toronto could do the daring thing and have a debate on free speech. And so that was a concrete plan, right? And they were looking for something to do. They didn't know what to do. And that is what they did. And for better or for worse. And that was much better than many of the things that they could have done. Now, it still worked out that it became impossible really for me to keep my position there, although I did for about a year. But it is also the case to know that if you're going to step outside of the bounds of normal propriety, doesn't hurt to have a plan, especially for the people that you confuse, because they also don't know what to do, and they're going to hunker down and they're going to dissociate themselves from you if you are deemed to be a risk, especially a contamination risk. Yeah. And so in the topics you were discussing, especially on the rolling side, would have that element because, of course, to the degree that the propaganda surrounding the idea of transphobia is effective, you can easily be tarred and feathered and run out of town on a rail. But you weren't. That didn't exactly happen in the school. So
you said something interesting about, and I agree, that the university, the dean has no right in your own home what you do with YouTube. How does that correlate to the dean's business or the university's business? what's interesting is that when you go into the handbook, which after all this occurred, I went and kind of poked into, it's written that they have every involvement at this school into whatever a teacher says politically on social media. If they say, and there's no clear objective definition of where that line is.
Of course. So they just reserve to themselves the right. Yeah, the College of Psychologists has basically done exactly the same thing in Canada. What the people that I'm in trouble for in relationship to my license. It's like, there are rules apparently about the way I can conduct myself, but the only way you find out what those rules are is by being accused of breaking them. It's not like they're written down, because of course they can't be, right? And so that's also a terrible thing, because, and this is something that's happening in our culture very rapidly, and apparently is something that de Tocqueville prophesied back in the mid-1800s, that if totalitarianism came to democracies, it would come in the form of essentially mid-level bureaucracies invisibly making everything daring illegal, right? And so, and those open-ended policies are precisely the sort of thing that they're like comprehensive traps. And so they could have actually gone after you.
Oh yeah, it was a unique contract to begin with, and I remember signing that when I first agreed on to that school. It said you could be fired for any reason, no reason, at any time.
Yeah,
and that's not a reality at your average high school. So that stood out to me. I thought, interesting. Okay. Well, this is a new world. This is an unusual world that I don't. So.
Yeah. Well, you could see also, though, you could actually understand, I would say, the reasons for a contract like that at a school like that.
Sure.
Because so many possible things could go wrong that the rules arguably would have to be more comprehensive to cover any possible occurrence. Okay. So what happens after Piers Morgan?
Things were different. No one ever spoke to me about it again, the video, or I was continued to make YouTube videos is what I should point out.
Okay. So you did continue to make and post them. Did they also attract more attention after that?
Now that I had this viral, I'm still doing the YouTube channel, and it's grown. It's not, so it wasn't like it was now. It's not huge, but it was decent, and it was fun. Most importantly, it was me and the music teacher. We were like, okay, we have this opportunity. He didn't want any part of it, and it was his personality type. If you had offered him the chance to swap places with me, I really think he would have declined it. It's just too much
exposure.
A lot that comes with that.
Mm-hmm.
You're in the unknown, and it's on you when you're entering this anyway. But we every Friday after school, we set up a little studio downstairs in my house, and every Friday after school, we would just sit down, record something, talk about whatever we wanted to talk about for an hour, and then edit it in an hour and post it.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the voice you hear in those early, if you ever look at those that's the voice you hear off camera. And he didn't want to show his face, which is understandable. And all those perspectives in there are his genuine perspectives, and he's very liberal. So it was interesting. It was an interesting dynamic. It was like this classic, it was so stereotypical, people thought it was fake. They were like, this is a clearly staged, which I take as a compliment. It's like, really, you think the only way we could achieve this outcome would be to script it? Well, that means we're doing something, right? So we were making these, and things just at the school, I noticed I stopped being invited to certain things. There was like a wedding. I wasn't invited to, like, my whole Site 1 team was, and everyone goes out for drinks on Friday. There's the bar nearby, and
the hero, heroes in classic stories often become contaminated by the unknown. So even in the Lord of the Rings stories, the fact that Frodo and Bilbo both know Gandalf makes them somewhat socially unpopular in the Shire, right? Even though they're associated, they're associated with magic power, and you might think that's all status. It's like, it's not all status. It makes the people who want to operate only within the confines of the Shire, let's say, very nervous, and rightly so, because that is a disruptive force. And so even when Bilbo, comes back from his initial adventure, he's regarded with suspicion for the rest of his life. Admiration, yes, but also suspicion. And from the more conservative forces, you might say.
That's a good point.
So, yeah. Well,
that's how it felt.
Yeah, well, you can also understand that biologically, if with the zebra analog in a way, it's like you don't want to be too close to the target of the predators, and this is a deep biological instinct, that the reason that fish exist in schools and herbivores exist in herds is because if you're with a bunch of other animals of your type and a predator attacks, the probability that it will be you is proportionate to how well you hide in the herd, obviously. So to the degree that you live life as a prey animal, then you're going to hide in the herd. Now, the question you might ask yourself is, do you want to live life as a prey animal? And human beings really have that choice because we're very strange creatures. We're predators, but we're also prey animals, and you can take either of those pathways forward.
And it was interesting because this opportunity came along where I was presented with the decision: do I leave the herd, go into the unknown on this journey and see where it takes me, or do I go back to the safety?
Okay, so you said now that there was some social consequence afterwards, but that things more or less went back to normal. What happened with the students? And then eventually your job at the school did disappear. So walk us through the aftermath of this flurry of attention.
The students, I think that the staff went to great lengths to insulate the students. That student that was the voice in the video, he loved it. He was aware of it. And in that meeting with the lawyers, I was like, look, so-and-so, I'd be happy to talk to I think he's going to be fine with it. No one expected this, but he's a good kid. They're like, no, we don't want you anywhere near this. We'll talk to the parents, and the parents were fine with it. He already had the releases. It was...
Yeah, that's good. So you had dotted your I's and crossed your T's with regards to student involvement.
So long story short, a few months later, I had another conversation with that student around communism. We were continuously doing what we had always been doing with the video production, but I was feeling more and more like I got to be careful. And the music teacher was telling me, he's like, look, man, you've got a lot of eyes on you. And it made logical sense that they were looking for any slip up, anything that I got the sense that they wanted to get rid. It would have been easier to get rid of me when that video came out. First video. But there was so much attention around it that it would have put them at risk to do so.
Right.
I don't know. I'm not saying that there was a plan to wait and let that blow over and then but I think they needed it good enough. I thought they were just not going to renew my contract over the summer, which is usually what they do. It's very common.
And you thought that might happen?
I thought with 90% certainty that that's what would happen. It would make sense. As you said, it would be the logical thing to do. It's in their best interest. There's no good to come of having one of your teachers out there with a growing audience, small but growing audience, saying certain things that or examining.
It could be troublesome.
There's no benefit to that.
Well, yeah. The funny thing too is that there's no benefit from a pure analysis of risk, but what you did with those videos definitely, in my estimation, anyways, brought credit to the school. So, with more imagination, what you accomplished could have been very useful to the school with more imagination.
That would require them to go public, though, which they were not going to do. They don't want that spotlight. That would require people to know what.
Yeah, well, but that harkens back to something that we discussed, is that the default presumption for the vast majority of people is no amount of success justifies risk. Right. And then people ask themselves, well, why am I not successful? It's like, well, because your threshold for risk is zero. And zero isn't a threshold of risk that's associated with success. So if your presumption is, I'll only be successful if I take no risks, that's the bargain, then you've foregone success. And the thing about that that's perverse is that that's a risk, because we actually don't know how much success we need in order to reconcile ourselves to life. Life is very difficult. And so you might need a fair bit of actual success and opportunity to offset the difficulty. Otherwise, it's bitterness and regret, which is not a good pathway. So, you know, I made excuses for the administrators at your school, let's say, for being taken aback, and said that it was understandable of them to assume that you were going to merely abide in a predictable way by the rules. But had they been more entrepreneurial and more open to the idea of opportunity, then the school itself could have benefited dramatically from what you had accomplished. But that's also, you know, that also would mean that in the best of all possible worlds that, you know, you might have been able to present them with a plan to make that easy for them, right? So
well, I did see huge potential in that. Suddenly the students, but there's a lot of potential downside and risk to this too. And the students suddenly have the ability to create content that can reach a large audience.
Right.
I mean, I haven't thought this out in a clear plan, but it was an opportunity.
Well, it's an opportunity to have a much more realistic video editing program.
Oh.
It's like, well, now we're going to make things that people will watch.
If I had been if this had occurred at that first high school, Neshoba, where we were already putting things on Twitter, they would have, I remember the head of my department, who knows what we could have done with this.
Right. So you think he would have run with it? Yeah, yeah. Tell me what happened.
Yeah, I can put a button on it.
Yeah, what happened with your job? Like you said, you know, you thought that the most likely consequence would be that they just wouldn't renew your contract.
Yeah.
And when did you come to that conclusion, and how did you reconcile yourself to that?
I need to run with this opportunity, grow if I can with this platform in case something happens. It seems like that's a really bad, logically, that sounds like a really bad backup plan. I'm going to make a YouTube channel, but it is something, and it's, again, I would have been a fool not to run with that ball as far as I could take it.
Well, especially with your broader ambitions, you know, because you were interested in the broader sense in
connecting with an audience,
right,
as a filmmaker as well. It's like suddenly, I mean, who knows what I could do with this?
Right.
So, but to put a button on this, what happened, I did the same thing. I uploaded a video with a different student who hadn't seen that video. And I thought, because it was just from another conversation, but it was identical. The pattern was so identical. I thought this might be worth sharing.
Yeah.
It's identical to the last one. So what could go wrong?
Yeah.
He was a new student. So I was like, we need to get permission from your parents if you want to have, after it was done. I was like, look, we could upload this. It's identical. Well, I need permission from your parents, like written confirmation. I need your permission because you're new. So we don't have the releases. And so I got that, uploaded, I told the music teacher, and he was like, you know, just because we'd been going back and forth on what to do with the channel, because we knew people wanted that kind of, you know, that's what the audience wanted, to see real students.
Yeah, right.
But I had toyed with it. I alluded to the communist conversation with that other student. And so I had posted that previously. 2 weeks go by. In the middle of the day, I get called into a meeting and they say, we've decided to part ways because you uploaded a video to YouTube against policy. We told you not to do that. I said, you told me not to do that? You congratulated me. I was like, how was it okay the first time? And I could tell, though, when I walked in the room, their mind was already made up. It didn't matter what I said, so I didn't really say much. And I said, are you alluding to this student? I spoke to the parents, and I said, have you spoken to his parents?
Yeah.
And they said, no, we're happy to do an investigation or reach out to him if that's what you'd like, or you can just agree to leave now. And they said, could you check with his parents? Like, it seems like a factor to take in. So I said, for sure, we'll just do the investigation. You know, there's like, okay, go home and HR will be in touch in 3 days. But I couldn't touch anything. They took my computer, everything. And I was like escorted like a criminal out.
All right. Well, look, I think I'm going to end the YouTube side with that. But I think what we'll do on the Daily Wire side is delve into that in a little bit more detail.
Sure.
It'd be interesting to continue the conversation about, well, why your school made that decision, what possible role HR might have played, and how these things could be managed in general, because, well, people who are watching and listening are going to be interested in, well, what strategy should you adopt if you dare to take risks within the confines of an organization and find yourself running afoul of the authorities? And I want to know, like, exactly how you thought this through. So for everybody who's watching and listening, you can join us on the Daily Wire side for the remainder of this conversation. And for now, Warren, thank you very much for coming in today to talk about this. Yeah. So, part of your story is what happens when you mess with an incredibly powerful technology, right? Because you're living your normal life and you're playing with YouTube.
I think that is the interesting story.
Definitely. It's like, look the hell out, because this is a global communication platform that you're publishing on. And so how do you deal with that? Well, no one knows. No one knows. Hence the discussion. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
And to everybody watching, listening, the film crew here in Manhattan today, thank you guys very much for setting this up, and ran very smoothly technically, and that's always good. And join us on the Daily Wire side, everyone, for the continuation of this discussion. Bye-bye.